Hi everyone, I'm Maria De-Arteaga, PhD in Machine Learning and Public Policy from Carnegie Mellon University and an incoming assistant professor at UT Austin.
Hi, I'm Riccardo Fogliato. I'm a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon and a research fellow at the Partnership on AI, and this is joint work with our advisor, Alexandra Chouldechova.
And in this video, Riccardo and I will be presenting to you our CHI 2020 paper, A Case for Humans in the Loop, Decisions in the Presence of Erroneous Algorithmic Scores. In many domains, algorithmic-assisted decision-making is being deployed or considered for deployment. Often, it takes the form of a risk assessment instrument. These are predictive models that estimate the likelihood that a person or a case will have poor outcomes. Our work focuses on the child welfare setting. When we're evaluating the risks and the opportunities of using machine learning for decision support, this requires us to understand how humans use the system's recommendations. At the center of this research is, are co-workers in the child welfare setting able to dismiss algorithmic recommendations when the tool misestimates risk? The findings are, first, we find that when a risk assessment model to assist co-workers was deployed, co-workers indeed altered their behavior when using algorithmic recommendations. But we find that surprisingly, they were less likely to adhere to recommendations resulting from misestimated scores. In the US, it is estimated that 37.4% of children experience a Child Protective Services investigation by the age of 18. In 2018, there were 4.3 million referrals, these are calls to the hotlines, and these involved 7.8 million children, of whom 3.5 million received investigation or an alternative response. The high volume of calls means that not every call can be investigated, and the information communicated in a call can often be inconclusive. However, given the high risk of false negatives, meaning failing to investigate a case where the child was indeed in danger, this has led many agencies to make other sources of information available to the call worker, such as the criminal history of the adults involved in a call. In turn, the explosion of the information available has led many to turn their eyes to algorithms and ask, can an algorithm tell when kids are in danger? Many local agencies are hopeful that this will reduce the number of high-risk cases that are missed by the system. Meanwhile, others have expressed concern over the increased deployment of these systems. In our work, we study what happened when the algorithmic risk assessment system was deployed in Allegheny County, the county where Pittsburgh is located. Here, what we're seeing is an overview of the call workers' decision-making process prior to the deployment of the tool. The call worker has access to the information communicated to them in the call and to administrative data records associated to the children and adults involved in a call. And based on this information, they're tasked with deciding whether to screen in or screen out of the call. If the case is screened in, an investigation is opened, a social worker visits the home, and different outcomes may take place, such as services being offered to the family or the child being placed out of the home. In case that the call is screened out, no investigation is open. In 2016, Allegheny County deployed an algorithmic risk assessment tool to assist call workers with their decision. This tool takes as input the historical records and outputs a score in a range from 1 to 20, where high scores indicate a higher predicted risk, and flags some cases that are estimated to be at a very high risk of out-of-home placement. For these cases, if the call worker believes that the call should be screened out, they require their supervisor's approval to do so. Since the deployment of the tool, the call worker has access to the call, the records, and the score when they're making their decision. We circle back to the question at the center of this research, that is, are call workers able to dismiss algorithmic recommendations when the tool misestimates risk? This question can be framed in terms of algorithmic aversion and automation bias, two ends of a spectrum of how humans make use of recommendations provided by an algorithmic system. Algorithmic aversion refers to undercompliance, This phenomenon leads the human to disregard the machine even when the recommendation may be providing useful information that would improve the quality of decisions. On the other end of the spectrum, we find automation bias, which results from overcompliance. These are cases where the human fails to incorporate external information and blindly follows the machine. The findings of our study show that in the case of Allegheny County, call workers did alter their behavior when algorithmic recommendations were deployed, meaning they were not fully prey of algorithm aversion. But we also find that they were less likely to adhere to the recommendations resulting from misestimated scores, which means that they didn't fall on the end of the spectrum of automation bias, blindly following the recommendations. My co-author Riccardo will walk you through the results.
So thank you, Maria. It is helpful to get a better picture of a timeline. The algorithmic tool was trained on data prior to July 2014. And however, the tool was not deployed until August 2016. And in December 2017, slightly more than 1 year after deployment, it was discovered that the tool was affected by a glitch. And at that time, the glitch was finally addressed. So we performed two analyses. In our first analysis of automation bias, we compare the decisions made by call workers between the pre-deployment and the post-deployment periods. While in our analysis of algorithm aversion, we study the decisions made by call workers in the post-deployment period alone in presence of a glitch. So let's first look at this technical glitch. So as a result of a glitch, some of the model inputs were miscalculated in real time, and this in turn led to a misestimation of the scores that were shown to the call workers. However, the glitch only affected the risk scores and not the raw data call workers had access to. And in the heat map on the right, we compare the assessed score with the shown score. The assessed score is the score that should have been shown to the call workers, while the shown score was what was actually shown. And as you can see from the matrix, most of the mass lies on the diagonal. This means that the misestimation was typically not severe. Indeed, only 17% of the scores were miscalculated by 5 points or more. And one interesting peculiarity that we leverage in our analysis is that many of the cases that should have been flagged as mandatory screenings were not flagged as such. So let's start with the first analysis. Here we compare the behavior of call workers in the pre and post deployment periods. Since we are not able to retroactively reproduce the glitch, to get the pre-deployment shown scores, in the plot on the right, we compare the screening rates across values of the assessed risk score for each of the two periods. And if the deployment had not influenced the behavior of call workers at all, then we should observe that ceteris paribus, the screening rate for each level of a score should not change. However, we see that the steeper slope of a post-deployment curve, particularly for very high and very low risk cases, indicates that post-deployment screenings are better aligned with the score. And we see both a pronounced increase in the screening rate of the highest risk cases and a pronounced decrease in the screening rates for low and moderate risk cases. Likely due to resources constraints, the overall screening rate did not vary between the two periods, remained constant around 45%. And we also checked that there was no significant change in the population of children or in the county's policies. Our second analysis instead focuses on the behavior of call workers in presence of a glitch in the post-deployment period. In the plot on the right, we compare the screening rates for assessed and shown scores. So we again can see that the human decisions were better aligned with the assessed score rather than with the shown scores. In particular, screening rates are higher for very high values of the assessed score than for those of the shown score. So what happens when the score is misestimated? This plot shows that the percentage of screenings for a bin version of a shown score. So correct indicates that the assessed score is equal to the shown score. Underestimation means that the shown score was lower than the assessed score, and overestimation means that the score shown was higher than the assessed score. So if coworkers were to blindly follow the recommendations of a risk tool, we would observe that within each score bucket, the screening rates should be the same across all three classes. However, we observe something very different. Among cases with similar shown scores, cases for which the score was underestimated are screening at much higher rates than the others. And this means that humans, at least at the aggregate level, are able to identify that the risk is being underestimated for these cases. So, however, this does not differentiate between the different magnitudes of misestimation. We can investigate this question by studying the decisions made for cases that should have been flagged as mandatory screenings in absence of a glitch, but were not flagged as such. This plot here shows the proportion of cases with assessed mandatory screening that were actually screened in for each bucket of shown score. You can see that the screening rate is approximately constant across all buckets, suggesting that the underestimation of the assessed score have virtually no effect on the coworkers' actions. And even when the shown placement score was more than 12 points lower than the assessed placement score, the screening was still as likely as for a shown mandatory case. And these findings suggest that coworkers make use of other pieces of information, either from a call or from the administrative data system directly, and they take this information into account into their decision process.
So what lessons can be learned from this work? The retrospective nature of our study offers a rare opportunity to study a phenomenon that would be unethical to study otherwise. And by virtue of being a study of a real deployed system, it has the advantage of having inherent field validity. However, because the study is retrospective and the corruption, the glitch that we study, was systematic, not random, we cannot establish causality, and we can only speculate what led to this positive behavior that we observe based on conversations with county staff. In terms of deployment, some elements that may have had an impact include, first, the fact that the call workers had access to the raw data, and these data did not suffer from the glitch. In addition to that, they had explicit instructions to only use the score as complementary information and not fully rely on it. And they had experience using and making these decisions before the deployment of the tool. One question that remains open is, if call workers start the job once the tool is deployed, will this behavior remain the same? And finally, it is worth making a note about the absence of explanations, which, while we usually consider explanations to be thought of as desirable, there is a chance that in this case, they could have misled the users into over-relying in the tool. In terms of auditing, some elements worth noting are that the glitch was discovered because the team responsible for deployment has engaged in continuous auditing. And when thinking about what audits to do, it's important that we don't just do one-time audit before deployment, but that the audits are periodic and take into account the framework into which the tool is embedded. And here it is worth noting that the continuous engagement of stakeholders and the continuous auditing may have led the call workers to have increased vigilance of potential mistakes. In future work, we plan to assess which of these factors contributed to the desirable behavior that we observed, and we plan to do this through experimental setups. And we also hope that this work can inform the research of others who are studying how to design tools for better human-machine complementarity. Thank you very much.